Great. So welcome everyone. Here today to talk about how do we let the client lead. So this can be a really confusing topic for new health coaches. So I'm going to give you some tips today on how you can practically do this in your practice. And we're going to talk first about what exactly does that mean to let the client lead. So I've got some notes. You might just want to have a little notebook, pen and paper there to take your own notes. So let's get going. So this was a topic that came up in my Facebook community. We were talking about being the expert and, not being the expert as a health coach, and talking about this point about, we're really client-centered and we want to let the client lead. That's one of the founding principles of coaching. It's really client-centered. And so some people were asking, well, why do I see, lots of wellness programs out there, coaching programs out there where there are weekly topics and modules. And, it seems like the coach, the person who's delivering the program, is actually delivering content every week to, the participants. That doesn't sound like client-led. That actually sounds like it's being led by the coach or the expert or whoever it is. So that's a little bit of what I want to address today, to just bring some clarity to how we can still show up as coaches, show up with the coaching mindset, the coach approach, and let the client lead, be client-centered, and also still market our programs. How do we rationalize and kind of bring all of that together? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So first, what I want to share with you is just a little bit more background, a little bit more understanding about what does it mean to be client-led and to be client-centered in our coaching process. So the number one thing that we have to remember here is really all about the coaching mindset, which is that we hold and honor that the client is creative, naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. They are not broken. They don't need to be fixed. They have all of the answers inside of them. So that's the number one thing we have to hold in coaching in order to come from that place of being client-centered. So client-centered means that the client is the center of the relationship. All of our focus is on them. It's about their content, their topics, their goals, their agenda, what they want to work on. This is not about the coach's agenda or really anything to do with the coach in terms of being client-centered, right? So it's not about my performance, my ego, what I think I want to bring to the coaching relationship. It's really focused on the client, all about the client's needs and serving them. So again, being client-centered means that the client is in charge of the topic, of the content, whatever they want to focus on. Being client-centered also brings more of sort of an equality to the relationship. We're on equal ground. We stand shoulder to shoulder with one another. It does not put the coach in a place of authority, right? We're both together here. And in fact, it takes the coach away from being the expert and actually puts the client as the expert, of course, in their own life. What else does it mean? It means that coaching is a shared relationship. It's a shared experience of growth and change that the client is going to go through. And being client-centered also means that the coach just doesn't sit there and just listen and be ineffective and not actually have a role and do anything. So that's not what it means either, right? We want to make sure that we're finding a balance between being the expert and being the authority and just sitting there listening to the client go on and on, right? We need to find that balance between directive coaching, which would be totally just telling the client everything that they should do to improve their health and well-being. And like I said, just sitting there, listening, being totally ineffective. So it's about finding the balance sort of on that spectrum for you. And there really is a lot of variation within that spectrum for you to find for yourself. As health coaches, we need to find our own style and our personality. And we really want to bring that to our coaching relationships. It's all about really meeting the client where they're at, where they are today, and helping move them forward. So that's really what we want to look at. There's a great quote actually by James Prochaska, who was really the one of the founding people in a group of folks who talked about readiness for change and sort of the behavioral change process with people. And he has a quote about being client-centered, and it says, "Be client-centered, but not so client-centered that you're not helping someone as much as you possibly can." So again, that just goes to that point of, being client-centered, we're focused on the client, we're in service of them, they own the content, but it doesn't mean that we just sit there idly and just listen, right? We do have an active role, and we are really trying to help the client to move forward. So I have a few tips for you now on how you can stay client-centered in the coaching relationship, and a few tips to sort of, really make sure that you're adhering to this in your coaching practice. So the first tip is really establishing your coaching presence. So as coaches, we really want to find a way to stay grounded and centered, to show up, in the present moment so that we can hold space for the client. So we need to look at how are we doing that in our own lives. Before we show up to the session, when we are in the session, how are we maintaining that coaching presence? So that's an important point. Number two is we do need to maintain that coaching mindset that I just shared with you, holding that the client is naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. That will keep us client-centered if we show up from that place. The third point is we really do need to facilitate a client-centered process. So how do we do that? Well, it's centered on the client. It's about bringing out their inner wisdom, their strengths, their values and attributes. So it's client-centered in that way because they're bringing all of that to their transformational process. It's not me as the coach with all my skills and abilities coming to, the coaching. It's really honoring those within the client. So that's what we mean by client-centered process. It's centered on the client. They are deciding on the content, the topic, the areas of focus, and it's also centered on them in terms of their own wisdom, strengths, values, and characteristics for sure. Another way that we can really honor this principle of being client-centered is to dance in the moment. And what that means is that we're really open as the coach to bend and flow and really follow the energy of the client in the coaching session. We follow them wherever they need to go, and we track them, with our coaching skills, with our tools and our resources, and we bring those to assist and guide and facilitate this process for the client. So when we show up from that place of, our coaching mindset and having our coaching presence, then this beautiful dance really does start to develop between you and your client. And you're able to just be there with them, letting them lead. So if you think about dancing, usually there's a lead and someone who's following. And so in the coaching relationship, it's the client that's leading and the coach is following along and tracking and, helping to move the client forward. So you let the client set the agenda, you let them decide on their goals, their vision, their action plans, their accountability. That's all driven by the client. So that was actually my next point, so that all the planning and all the accountability in your coaching is co-created and client-led. So this starts from the very, very beginning. It starts from your agreement. You're co-creating that together. You're getting each other's opinion. You're agreeing to that together. Then you might, get into the sessions and do some exploration. And so, whatever vision and ideal scenario and wherever the client wants to go in the future, that's directed by them. We're not influencing that outcome at all. And then when the client decides on some goals and some action steps, those are all exactly what the client wants to develop and focus on. And then again, when we get to the action plan and the accountability, again, all co-created, all really having that main focus on the client and then bringing their own ideas, the own answers to that aspect of the coaching. The other point in staying client-centered is that we as coaches, we don't want to rescue the client. And by that we really mean, we don't want to always just be jumping in with suggestions. We know that we're not supposed to tell people what to do, give advice, prescribe, diagnose, and tell people what to do. So that's really rescuing, right? Rescuing means that we're kind of jumping in there at the first instance with an answer, with a solution. And really what the coaching process is all about is the exploration. We really want the client to be able to dig into it, explore their own experiences, do some experimenting, take on some challenges, and explore for themselves. That's the way that they're going to grow and learn and make some of these behavioral changes. So we don't want to rescue the client. We don't want to jump in too soon with suggestions and recommendations. I'm probably going to talk about on another call, on another live, how we might offer suggestions, because I think that's another hot topic with new coaches. How do we make suggestions, or do we at all? So I'll probably take that and do another live on that one. So don't rescue the client, don't jump in too soon with suggestions, but allow the client to do their own work. And my final tip in terms of how to stay client-centered is to remember that the client is always accountable to themselves. So of course they have hired you as their coach for a specific period of time, and so they will be accountable to you. You're going to be checking in each time to make sure that they've done their action steps and to do that accountability check-in. But the bottom line here is, in coaching, we are really hoping to foster self-accountability with the client, that they will really develop that within themselves and they will become accountable to themselves over time. It just needs a little practice, so that's what they have our support for in the beginning phases there. So always remember, clients are accountable to themselves. They're not accountable necessarily to the coach. So we really want to have the client know that we are holding them accountable, but what are they going to do to develop their own self-accountability? So once you go through the action planning phase, at the end of your coaching session, you're always going to then ask the client, how are you going to hold yourself accountable to making sure that you complete these action steps? So that's one way that we can check in with them every time so that they can build that and develop it over time. So I just have a couple of practical steps that I have found for me in my own practice really, really helpful to stay client-centered in this way. Number one is to send a quick little prep email to your client in advance of the session. So, if your session's on Thursday, on Monday, you might just send a quick little email, checking in with the client, confirming that you're still on for that time. And then I always ask something like, what would you like to focus on our upcoming session? What's the area of focus? What do you need some coaching support with? What would you like the outcome of the session to be? So that way I can be prepared for that. I can show up ready to coach through whatever topic the client wants to work on. So again, letting the client lead, letting them decide the content and the agenda for the session. Another way I do that, so it's sort of building on that, we send the prep email in advance, and then when we actually get into the session, we want to confirm the agenda. So we want to confirm what the client wants to work on. So we might do our accountability check-in, and then we might just say to the client, so, you mentioned in your email that you'd like to work on exercise today, you'd like to focus on that. Is that still relevant for you now? And tell me a little bit more about what that might look like for you. Exactly what would you like to walk away from the session today with around exercise? You might also ask, how important is it for you to work on this today? So that way, those two sort of checkpoints, we're giving ourselves to, again, allow the client to lead, for them to determine the topic and the focus of the session, and to make sure that they're getting out of the session what they need. So that typically comes sort of after your foundational sessions with your clients. So when you have ongoing sessions, usually in many coaching sort of methodologies and approaches, we might use, say, the first 2 or 3 sessions as those foundation sessions where we're actually doing some exploring, we're doing some assessing, we're sharing some tools with the client so that they can explore and set that foundation. And then when we get into those ongoing sessions, that's really when we're inviting them to choose sort of the topics. So I hope that is helpful, those few little tips. And so what I want to do now is really address this question that has come up, which is, from new coaches, why do I see so many health and wellness programs out there with weekly topics or modules? That doesn't feel like it's client-led. So how are those coaches or those people who are delivering those programs, how are they honoring that point of it being client-centered? So the number one thing that I want to say around this is there are lots of sort of off-the-shelf, ready-to-go, done-for-you wellness programs out there that are not coaching. The bottom line thing that we have to remember here is that coaching is a totally unregulated industry. So, there's people out there just doing all kinds of things. I would say 99.9% of the people are not doing pure coaching, even if they've gone through a coach training program. So most people aren't doing pure coaching. They're doing a combination of educating and coaching maybe, or maybe it is more just like educating and training and, sharing information with the members, the participants in those programs. And that's, totally fine. That is what it is. But if you're a coach and you want to offer an online group coaching program, then you probably do need to balance that with some actual coaching, right? That's the only way that you can stay client-centered. So of course, if you're doing a group, you probably will have weekly topics or modules or, information that needs to be shared every week, sort of as a foundational piece. And then what you might do is add on some group coaching calls. So maybe every week, all your participants get on a call and you actually do some coaching. And that would be client-centered because you would invite, folks on that call to get coaching around whatever topic they needed, coaching around that week. So that's a way that we can balance that out and still maintain that coaching presence. So when it comes to one-on-one coaching, obviously it's much easier to stay client-centered when we're coaching one-on-one because it's me and the client, and I'm asking them what they want to focus on each week, and we really follow through that way. So another great line that I heard about coaching and the client-centered process is, that the client owns the content, the coach owns the process. So that really is the essence of it. The content, the topic, the areas of focus, the goals, the accountability, the action steps, that's all owned by the client. The coach holds the process, right? So we're holding the space. We're providing some tools and techniques. We're using our coaching skills. We're keeping the client on track. We're always kind of bringing them back to their goals and their action steps and what they want to work on. So I think that's a great line that really helps capture this client-centered process piece. And to remember that it's not 100%, that we just sit there and only ever listen to the client and never direct them in some ways. There are lots of things that we can do as coaches to guide and support and facilitate a client-centered process for our clients. So I hope those tips have been helpful today. I think as I went through this and sort of prepared for it, it brought up a few other topics that I'm going to break out and share in some upcoming Facebook Lives. So with that, if you have any questions at all, please post them in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer them. And as well, I'd love for you to share just in the comments, how are you being client-centered in your coaching process? Were there any of those tips that were really helpful for you that you might start implementing in your own practices? So, pardon me. So thanks for tuning in today, everyone. If you have any questions, like I said, I'd be happy to answer them. So post them below. Have a wonderful weekend. Happy Thanksgiving to all our Canadian friends out there. And I'm looking forward to having some turkey really soon. So bye for now, everyone.